So my name is Katie Hoskins, and I'm going to be leading this scholarly snippet session on entitled Brains versus Bots, Who Searches PubMed Better? So we're going to compare some librarian crafted strategies versus AI generated search strategies in PubMed and see who comes out a little bit ahead. Well, there are no prizes. There is the glory of winning. So we shall see what happens here. But before that, I am going to give a little caveat that your mileage may vary depending upon which LLM that you use. I am using Copilot for this presentation because that is the platform that my university has licensed and wants us to use. I do understand not only from my personal experience, but from feedback I've had from students who do use other products that they get different outputs based on the same question, the same prompt. So before we dive in, and Karen is going to kindly put the link into the chat, I'd like to hear your thoughts on using AI to develop a search strategy. So, and maybe you haven't yet, and that's totally okay, but I would appreciate hearing from you. I didn't mean to share the side. Forgot about that with how Pull Everywhere works. So definitely seeing some commonalities of coming up with keywords and synonyms, getting started. Some people are sharing that they're skeptical but willing to try. So I think a lot of us are of a similar mind of using it to find some of those related terms. Some people have put things in the chat. Yes. So all these are really good things, and it's helpful to use it to compare with other searches. Okay, this is great. Thank you. I mean, if you're still typing, I will go back and look at it a little bit later, but it's really helpful to see here. Oh, that's interesting. Someone said in their experience, AI just grabs from published strategies that they had already consulted. Does some things that are evil, like hallucinates mesh. So, and seen too many hallucinations. So lots of good feedback here. Thank you, everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. Like all good stories, it begins with a question, right? So this is a question comes from a project that I help some students on of in rural communities, does HPV self-sampling increase cervical cancer screening rates? So my search strategy, at least initially, is pretty basic. I have rural and then in parentheses self-sampling or self-collection with truncation and screening. So I've got three concepts here and one line. Then if we go over, I went to Copilot and I told it, develop a PubMed search strategy based on this question, same one I just gave you. And I told it to use quotation marks, truncation, and Boolean logic where appropriate. Now I know maybe y'all are a little biased. You may have some solidarity because I know many of you are librarians, but I'll go back to my strategy, but here's the Copilot one. And then I'm going to ask you, which one do you think is going to have more results? I know the number is not always the best indicator, but at least it is something quantifiable that we can look at. So as a reminder, this is my search strategy. And then there's Copilots. So then I want to ask you, which one do you think is going to have the greater number of results? Okay, AI or AI overlords. Some people do. Okay, so fair number of people have voted, and I did see that someone commented, right, greater number or greater number of better results, and yes, so I know it's not just the number, it is in part, it is the quality as well. But let's take a starting look here. Okay. So when I ran the searches as is, Copilot's search strategy had 57 results and mine had 187. So about 3 times as many articles as the AI generated search. There was an overlap of 52 results. So Copilot search found 5 articles that my search result did not. I would want to go back and take a look at those 5, see if they're relevant, see what I missed. To kind of echo what's going on in the chat, but also just my own philosophy anyways, is every person, every librarian, we have different approaches to doing a search. And for me personally, I like to be very sensitive and have a very big number so that I can personally winnow it down the way that I want to, rather than having it kind of narrow from the beginning. And then that way I can throw out those things that aren't so relevant. So let's take a closer look at the search strategies themselves. So, and if you could just put this in the chat, what do you notice that they have in common versus what do, yeah, let's just start with what do they have in common? Okay. So Boolean is in common. Yep. They both have that. Some of the phrases, someone mentioned they both cover the 3 main topics and the same ones, right? The population, the intervention, and the outcome. They both have truncation. Okay. Kathy mentioned true mesh terms. So those are some things that they have in common. What do you notice as some things that they have differently? So the tags, yes, Copilots used field tags. My terms did not. My search also did not have any mesh terms. So definitely a big difference that is there. And I'm liking too that somebody mentioned that, oh my gosh, where did it go here? More redundant phrases in Copilot. That's a big one that I've noticed when I've tested out the searches is rural is going to pull up things like rural communities, where here we have all this self-collection, self-sampling, self-testing. So there's just a lot of redundancy there that could be simplified. Is it wrong? No, but it could be better. Better truncation for the librarian search, I would agree. Somebody said Copilot truncation doesn't make sense. What's it supposed to pick up? So as an example here, self-collect with the asterisk, that's going to find self-collect singular, self-collects with an S, self-collecting, self-collected, collection, all those different endings. And that's possibly why part of the reason maybe that it had a little bit more results. So just taking a look here at some of those differences and just seeing how they do and why they may be different. Several of you have noted how AI can hallucinate mesh terms. Absolutely. So for those of you that may not be familiar with going to PubMed's advanced search, that is what you can do to see the history and the search details. How did PubMed interpret your search? And this one did have errors. Specifically, cervical cancer screening is a made-up mesh term. So something to be mindful of. All right, let's test it with one more question before we talk about some other uses. So this question that I have here is, do smoking cessation programs reduce the severity of peripheral arterial disease in Cuban Americans? So the search strategy that I developed is the peripheral arterial disease. And then this one's a little bit more complicated and not necessarily the best. I did this in like 5 minutes, just a couple minutes. Quit or stop or cessate and smoking. Just trying to get at those different variations that people refer to that same concept of quitting smoking. So with Copilot, I did the same thing as before, create a PubMed search strategy and use those same concepts, Boolean, truncation, and quotation marks. And so here's what this one gave me for Copilot. So it has 4 different concepts here. So I will ask you all one more time here. And Karen, if you'd be so kind as to put that link in the chat again, please. Which one do you think is going to have more results? But again, not necessarily better. I do know that. Okay, so most people in this case think that the librarian generated one will have more. So let's take a look here and see. So when I put these into the data PubMed just as is, and I did not play around with these a lot, so I'm not trying to rig the results. Copilot search retrieved 0, and the librarian created search strategy had 414. So let's take a look at this and see, why do you think that there might be that difference in the results? Yeah, some people are mentioning why no results too specific. Absolutely. They definitely used a lot of specific things. And the more ands that you have, the further down you narrow your results. So when I tested it, because I was curious. So when I took out this fourth string with all the Cuban American search terms, it brought the number of results to 29. When I took out the things with clinical outcomes, severity, and disease progression, it brought it up to 274. So, and I think this kind of goes back to how a lot of our experience as a librarian, and also just trial and error, right? We try out different things. Is that sometimes, more concepts isn't helpful, and relying on someone to say clinical outcomes in the title abstract is relying on a lot. They could be relevant. Yes, I would not have included the clinical outcomes either. I would have focused on those first two ones. So they both use those search strategies that we talked about: quotation marks, Boolean, truncation. Again, the Copilot one does use mesh terms that the librarian search strategy did not, and it could certainly do that if we wanted it to. There are some terms like tobacco that could be useful to add. So definitely some things here. Somebody commented on the truncation placement on Latino. Absolutely, because Latina, there's the plurals, Latinx, Latin, all those different options. Okay. So one thing that overwhelmingly was mentioned at the beginning that people have used AI for with a search strategy is brainstorming related terms and concepts. So in that same chat where I told it to build me a search strategy for the one about peripheral arterial disease, I asked it, what are some different terms to use for the Cuban American community? So it focused the response on those kind of terms that it found in health research and gave me some links to the different places where it had found that. So this can be helpful because, especially if you're trying to do an evidence synthesis project, we're trying to be exhaustive a lot of times and cover the different variations. The only concern that I would have instead about this is that it's using a derogatory term. And there have been discussions, I know, about how those older and derogatory terms might be used in evidence synthesis projects. So someone did ask, what would I use instead? A search hedge. If there is a search hedge, that can be used. And I'm definitely not saying don't use the output of this. It's more so just taking a look and seeing what might be useful and trying out different combinations. All right, so here's another example. And this is a very recent one. I just met with a PI in this past week, and they are working on a scoping review protocol related to whiplash imaging. Some about whiplash is not one of them. So this is really throwing me into the deep end of not knowing anything about this topic. So the researcher gave me, in related to whiplash, cervicogenic, acceleration, deceleration, and neck trauma as some synonyms. So I decided, well, hey, let me just test this out and see what does this give me back as some potential other synonyms. I liked that the response broke it down by mechanism-based, anatomical, clinical, and symptom-based terms. And there are a couple here where I'm like, those are possible. Cervical strain, cervical sprain. Those are ones I'd go back to the researcher and ask about. I mean, a lot of times we're doing this anyways. We're doing this manually a lot of times, going through articles, trying out different searches, seeing the terms that are used, using things like Yale Mesh Analyzer. But this is something that may either just kind of, like me, if you're not familiar with the topic, give you a starting point, or just kind of just make some of that work a little bit faster. So another thing that we do with our search strategies a lot of times is translating searches to other databases. Now, doing just a basic literature search, a lot of times you're not really going to go be this quite extensive or thorough. But if you're working on a systematic review, scoping review, so forth, you do need to do this. So I told it to translate this PubMed search to Embase and make sure to use appropriate M-tree terms. So just in case anybody's not familiar, M-tree terms are what Embase uses instead of mesh terms. They have their own controlled vocabulary, and it is different than PubMed's. So Copilot, this is their output. They did a decent job at translating it, and by that I meaning they changed out the mesh term so that it's what am I thinking here? The M-tree term with the explode, the single quotation marks. They changed the TAB and brackets to how it does it for title, abstract, and keyword in Embase. So I think that they did a decent job for just a generic translating it. The one thing that they missed, which could happen on the human side as well, is when you are looking in M-tree, it has a whole bunch of related terms. And these terms that I highlighted in yellow are something that are unique to Embase. They are not listed in PubMed or other things as entry terms. And this is because Embase has more of a European focus. So in terms of being exhaustive and thorough for a systematic review, that's where it could be helpful. I don't fault the AI for this. It's just knowing what are some of those limitations because it's not going to have access to it. What I might suggest instead that you do is try Polyglot because it has a very similar output and a much smaller environmental impact. They are changing platforms on October 31st, whether that's an omen or something else, I don't know, because I found that out this week when doing this, is they're changing their platform. But it's a tool that I know a lot of librarians do use to translate searches. And it's, again, a similar output. So the last thing that I'm going to explain, because I'm just being mindful of our time here, is checking Boolean logic. So I use medsyntax.org to check Boolean logic. You may have already also used this resource yourself. I use it sometimes on my own logic, but more so when I'm peer reviewing other people's searches. So it's a very simple interface. It's nice that it can tell you if you have too many parentheses or too few, or if you have confusing logic. So although you can play around with it, you could potentially be frustrated if you're like, I'm trying all these things, I can't figure out where the mistake is, or what am I missing? That's where AI could be helpful. So what I told it was I went to it and said, help me understand what's wrong with this Boolean logic here. And I did the same search string that I'd put into med syntax. So then it's saying that the operator precedence and grouping are not clearly defined. So basically a problem with, again, the Boolean logic, which can lead to unexpected search results. It then goes to explain why this is wrong. So how PubMed processes Boolean operators and the order in which it does it. Giving an example of how PubMed might interpret this, which is not the way I would want it to do, because it's looking for cancer or neoplasm, yes, and cervix and detection. But then it would or that with screening or diagnosis, which is not what we would want. So then it goes on to offer a corrected version and explaining why it thinks that this is correct. So just to kind of summarize, don't use AI search strategy without checking it. Not that I think anybody would, but it needs to be said, especially that controlled vocabulary that many of you mentioned having experienced that it hallucinates. To use with caution, translating your searches to other databases, maybe consider using Polyglot. I mean, either way, if you're using it as a starting point, that's totally fine. And definitely very useful for brainstorming concepts and variant spellings and checking the Boolean logic. Before we get into questions, I would just like to know if your thoughts on using this have changed at all based on some of the concepts that were covered in this discussion. Okay, so, and totally okay that either not planning to change your opinions or how you might be using it. just curious if you guys have any ideas. I mean, it's a tool, right? It's like anything else. How do we use it? Using it responsibly. I mean, when Google started to become very prominent, there was a lot of talk about how that was going to impact things. So, one last thing before I do questions, which is, feel free to share with us some feedback about how this session went, what you'd like to see in the future. I know that they're quick sessions and I talk a little fast sometimes, so I apologize about that. The next workshop is going to be in November on Introduction to Systematic Review Protocols. But that is everything that I wanted to cover today, and I welcome any kind of conversations or discussions that you all would like to have. Make us cheer and ooh and ah. I love that idea, right? Of let's just do it. They're kind of like a pep rally. So glad that you guys enjoyed this. Thank you.
Feel free to briefly unmute yourself if you want to ask a question.
Or just talk about this. We can always, I'm sure that could be omitted from the recording, uploaded later, if need be. So, yeah, I am by no means an expert. I am just trying things out and seeing how it goes. My Truro University has a vice provost of AI, so it's something that my university is very strongly encouraging and wanting us to integrate. So I'm just trying to explore it and see how it goes. Yeah, you're very welcome. Curious about prompt engineering. Have you adapted your searches as you explore? Not super much. I would if I was like really, really using it. Like that whiplash one that I'm starting to explore because I know like nothing about the topic. That one I might play around with a bit more. I have a hard time with AI because of the environmental impact. So I'm trying to straddle that line between using it and being comfortable with it and then using it when necessary. But I would adapt. No, I definitely think a lot of it are limitations of the platform, and a lot of AI has changed a lot in the last year, in the last 6 months. So, how is this going to continue to change? It will. So, we'll see how things go. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm glad to know other people think about the environmental impact too. It's a hard one, especially as limited and finite as our water cycle is. Okay, somebody asked, have I compared Copilot to ChatGPT? No, I have not, and that is because my university is still trying to figure things out, but they really only want us to use Copilot. Very recently, they licensed Gemini, so it's a little unclear what the policy is if I'm allowed to use it. I mean, I could always use my personal computer and test it, but that's why I have not tested it thus far. But I have heard some of our students say, so I had some students I don't know, last month I think we were doing some things where I wanted them to create a search strategy in Copilot and compare it and evaluate it. And some of them decided to use Chat GPT instead. And they had very different results. Some of them said that they liked Chat GPT a lot better than what Copilot did. Is there a good search term to filter research that's only performed with humans? Um, it okay, I do have nowhere near the experience that a lot of other wonderful librarians do, but what I have found, I try not to use the human filter. I know that there's the one that I think it's the Cochrane one, and it's humans, and it's like the double knots. Um, so you could try that, but in general, I don't. But I also haven't had much reason to use it. Let me go back. Carrie asked if I could tell more about my assignment. I will be glad to do that in just a moment. Thank you, Lori, for sharing about the search filters because those are great. Have I compared it on different dates and with different browsers? We find these make a difference too. I have not tried a different browser, but I will try that now that you mention it because I'm curious about that. Actually that one for that I had on HPV, I had tried it like 6 months ago and like in the last week, and there was a difference in what it told me as to do. Um, my husband uses Chat GPT like Google. I tried it once and was impressed and a little frightened. I can understand that a lot, how people are using it a lot of times. For my assignment that somebody asked about, one of the ones that I did, and it was so the students, it was a two classes that I did. So the first session that I did, I went over like PubMed and some basic things about using AI, and the same thing with a Venn diagram and showing how what it does with search results. They had to do a presentation on one of the databases, so like Embase. And so what I had them do was compare their search strategy to the one from Copilot or ChatGPT, and what did they notice as the difference, and looking at some of those differences and results. So it was really interesting too, because I did some formative assessment at the end to get their thoughts, and it was really interesting to see what people thought. If you'd like to know more about that, just because you want to chit chat about it, feel free to email me. Put my email here in the chat. It was interesting stuff. You're very welcome. Please do this at a conference. Okay. I can try and do that, Christina. Thank you for your encouragement and support. I'm glad then that sounds like it was very useful. Did I not do my Turo email? Yes, I'll put it, I can put it back in here. Ha! I did CHSU. I am so sorry. What was I thinking here, brain? Um, that is funny. So yes, my colleague Rachel and my colleague and friend is talking about our joint meeting coming up for the NCNMLG, so the Northern California Nevada chapter, and then the Southern chapter, not the Southern chapter, my apologies, Southern California and Arizona. I am really having fun today with butchering words. Any other questions, comments, for the discussion? Just try to kind of keep it succinct.